Anyways, now what I wanted to sort of talk about is just in general how steadicams work and how how you basically go about balancing the steadicam and then operating it. Okay, so all steadicams, doesn't matter what size and shape they have, they all sort of work on the same principle. And the principle is this: you have some kind of a mounting system, and on one side you have your weights, so let's say a little a monitor there, and on the other side, for example, you have your camera. And the idea is that you're trying to basically balance it. So imagine here that you have this pencil, and again, one side is your weights, the other side is your camera. You're trying to find sort of this balance point in between them. And so if you move the pencil and you put it sort of in the exact same in the center of its gravity, then basically neither side will go up and down. And if you go if I move my finger like this, if it doesn't just slide off my finger, then as you can see, both sides will move equally. Now if I move this, for example, this pencil to one side, then now obviously that center of gravity has shifted to, let's say, now to the right side, meaning that if I were to let go of it, you can just see this just goes down. And then the same thing if I move this pencil. If I move it, I don't know if it's that, if you can see it up here very well, but basically this side will have a tendency to sort of make bigger sort of overlapping motion, and the reason is because it has more weight up here now than this side, and more weight equals more inertia, and that means that it just carries its motion more. And this works the same way if you have it, for example, up here. If I move this, then see how this whole pencil sort of wobbles back and forth. Now if I grab the pencil again more or less in the center of gravity, which is somewhere here, and if I hold the thing and I move it left and right, you can see that it tends to sort of stay more or less vertical. So that's sort of the idea, is like you want to sort of balance it so that it's pretty much the same weight on the top and the bottom. So again, as you're moving around with it and as you're running around with it, the steadicam basically won't wobble back and forth. Now the only thing is though, for example, let me grab this, is that if you were to again, this is the center of gravity, if you were to do it where this side and this side are identically the same weight, then the problem with that is then if you grab it, let's say at the gimbal, then the camera might, for example, go like this, if let's say you nudge it, or it might even go like this and it will just stay. So then one thing you sort of have to remember is, as you're adjusting the weight of the bottom here compared to the weight of your camera and your lens, that you want to make sure that the bottom is, like, first it's almost good to find a perfect balance between the weight wise between the two sides, and then after that just add a little bit of weight onto the bottom side of the Steadicam, because you want that side to be just enough, just a little bit heavier than the camera, and this way you're making sure that the camera will always be up and the bottom weights are always going to be on the bottom, and not any other way. And a good way to test to see if you've like I said, added just enough weight on the bottom where it's just a little bit heavier, is by doing the sort of a flip test. So basically you hold it, for example, vertical like this, and you just drop the camera or the weights, and you see how long it takes for it to sort of level itself. Now as you can see, this one, it takes about 2 seconds maybe. Yeah, maybe even a little bit more than 2 seconds. So that means that's pretty damn well balanced. If you, for example, drop it and it falls really fast to the bottom, that means that you have way too much weight on the bottom. Now that's where a lot of people make mistakes, because they'll balance it and again they'll see that their camera is level, it's pointing straight and all that stuff, and obviously it will, because if you put way too much weight on the bottom, then it will basically always force that the bottom just like it stays on the bottom until you start moving. Because again, if this is way too bottom heavy, when you start moving, that inertia, the weight of the bottom will sort of resist that forward, let's say, motion, and it will sort of go back. But then at the same time, when you stop, the inertia will carry it. So what's going to happen is you'll have a Steadicam that kind of wobbles back and forth like that, like this. So again, first thing you want to do is sort of adjust the weight, and again, remember, bottom or the side of the weights always has to be a little bit heavier than the camera. And the best way to test it is just by doing this drop test and see if it falls down, and it's and I would say if it falls down more than a second, like a second and a half, 2 seconds, then that's a pretty good result. And then after that, you can also test it just simply by by doing this kind of a test by moving it back and forth. So as you can see, if I'm moving it back and forth to the side, the camera, the Steadicam doesn't wobble like this. See, or if I go this way, it doesn't wobble. Let me see actually if I can right now, for example, screw it up a little bit and just extend the weights here. And by making this longer, again, it's sort of like the idea of the pencil, because I made the bottom now slightly longer, it's making the bottom heavier. So now if we do the test, as you can see, it drops a little bit faster. It's not horrible, but it just drops faster than it was before, meaning it's a little bit more heavy on the bottom. And you can see now it has a bit more of a tendency when I go back and forth to kind of go a little bit like this. It's still not horrible. Now again, if I added too many weights here, or if I extended this shaft up here too much, and I made this side too long, then again it would be too bottom heavy. Now that's sort of how you adjust these types of Steadicams. Is that when it comes to the balance of it, or the weight of it, is that first you sort of want to put in more or less the kind of weights and that you think you need to kind of make it slightly heavier than your camera, and then to really fine tune it. If let's say you put your weights, you're pretty close, and you really want to fine tune it, then you want to adjust the length of up here. And again, the shorter you make it, the less weight you have. The longer you make it, then the more weight you're adding, and you can this way finally adjust the weight of it. And it works the same way here on the fly cam. You have the here adjustable shaft on the bottom, and on the glide cam, and all these types of cameras, Steadicams. Now when it comes to let's say for example like these Steadicams, it sort of works in the same way. Is again, you put your weights here on the bottom, and again you want to adjust those weights so that like I said, they're just slightly heavier than the camera itself. And then when you drop it, you can see this one is, for example, falling maybe a little bit too fast, so it's still a little too much bottom heavy. And you can again adjust this because you can shift sort of the weights around. So remember, the longer you make it, so if I put it this way, it's going to be even heavier. More I put it up, making it shorter, making it lighter also. And with these, what's good is, like both of these and the Hague, is that they just pretty much use a simple screw here, meaning that you can put even a washer. Let's say this one's too much, so let's say I have 3 weights on there right now. I could put 2 weights and then a little small washer to just add a little bit of weight in there, and everything. And but it's pretty close now. But I would still want to probably go a bit further and adjust it so that again my drop test, so that the camera drops a little bit slower. And then afterwards you can just sort of adjust it, test it out this way. And as you can see, this one, the bottom moves a little bit, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not horrible. So as you can see, as I'm going back and forth, it's more or less staying level in this way. So that's the first thing you do. Next thing you want to do when balancing your Steadicam is to make sure that your camera is basically pointing in the right direction. So if you, for example, going to be walking with your Steadicam, and usually you probably want your Steadicam to just, your camera to just be pointing straight on and be level both when it comes to the tilt of the camera, so that it's not going this way or that way, and also level so that it's not rolling to left and right. And the way you do that is, let's say in these Steadicams, is by moving the camera or the plate itself that it's attached to, by moving it again left and right or back and forth. And you make these tiny adjustments. Here you make it by turning these screws. You have one here and on the bottom that moves it back and forth, and one here that moves it left and right. And if I were, for example, to, let's say I'll loosen this up. So now, as you can see, I moved the camera too much forward, and because of that, even though, like I said, weight-wise, it's pretty well balanced, the camera is basically too far forward, and so it's causing the whole Steadicam to lean forward. So in this scenario, for example, you'd want to just again move the camera back. So you do make those tiny little adjustments, at that point. And again, if it was, for example, leaning to the right side, the camera, then you would move this whole plate to the left side. If it's leaning too much to the left side, you move it to the right side. And that's kind of how you adjust it until you have the camera sort of pointing nice and level and left and right. And it works the same way up here on the fly cam or the glide cam. again, you would release, just unlock these 4 screws here, and you can move the whole plate back and forth, and then you have 2 more screws on the bottom, and allows you to move it back and forth. Now on these types of steadicams, it's the same sort of principle. Again, if like for example, let me just move this, and let's say I didn't know where to put it, I put it there, and as you can see, weight-wise, let's say it's all good, but the camera just, the whole steadicam is leaning back. That means that the camera is too far back, so you got to move it forward. So again, you can adjust this here easily, just move it forward, and just make small adjustments, and until you see it, it's still leaning back. Again, release it, move it a bit forward, lock it, and there it's pretty good. So once I'm happy with that, then I can lock it. Now, for example, if you have a camera that's, for example, leaning too much to the left or to the right, like let's say right now I could say the GoPro is leaning maybe a little bit more to the right, then that means that I want to shift the weights here to the left. So where you can do that in here is you just basically move the weights a bit to the left here. And if I look at it now, see now the GoPro is a little bit more straight. And the same way here. Here for example you have this extension arm attached, so it allows you to move it that much more. You can move the weight here more to the left, or move the weight here to the right. And so that's the difference here, is that versus these kind of steadicams, is that you can't move the camera physically left and right. You can only move it back and forth. So then you counter it with the weight on the bottom by moving it left and right. And that's sort of how it works. So again, first you want to adjust that balance, or the weight of it. So the bottom, or the weight side of the steadicam is slightly heavier than the camera, and then you make fine adjustments of the position of the camera, moving them left and right, back and forth, until the camera is nicely pointing straight and it doesn't roll left and right. And once you have that, then you pretty much you're ready to start doing your shots. Now when it comes to operating steadicams, again, these ones are fairly simple. These ones are fairly straightforward. Again, once it's well balanced and it doesn't move on you, then you can pretty much so I can see right now that it's still leaning back too much, so I can quickly make adjustment, go forward a bit, and then lock it. Let's see, there. Okay, now it's better. So when you're operating a steadicam, thing you got to keep in mind is that your hand rotations are isolated because of the gimbal. But what's not isolated is that you actually physically moving your arm up and down or left and right, for example. So when you're walking with it, you gotta be careful, and basically, when you take a step, you want to be almost like a ballerina. You're taking a step, but you want to make sure that here your upper body and specifically, your hands are not moving up and down each time you take a step. So instead of going like this, you want to sort of keep it perfectly steady, while you're the one that's kind of like walking around it, dancing around it. Now, in some rare cases, obviously, when you really have to run fast and stuff, your hand is going to move a little bit up and down. And as you can see up here, if you're further away from any object, then the motion, up and down motion, is not as visible. But the second you move really close, like you see up here, and when I'm really close to this bush, then that same amount of up and down motion is a lot more visible. So just sort of we want to keep that in mind. Either don't point the camera at some objects that are really nearby if you're running, really fast, close to them. Or try not to run when you're really close to, let's say you're really walking through some really narrow sort of corridor, things like that. Or if you are going to do it, then, you just try to, as much as you can, to kind of minimize that up and down hand motion. Now, what if you actually want the camera to, for example, let's say point to the left or point to the right, or go, up or down? Then here you can just apply a little bit of pressure, and then I'm talking about a tiny bit of pressure with your finger on the gimbal part, and if you apply that pressure, then basically you're stopping the gimbal from working freely, and then you can point the camera down. Let's say like this. You can point the camera down, or you can point it up, and the same thing if you want to, let's say, make the camera go left or right, and you just go like this, and then right, and then when you're ready, then you just release your finger. And just keep your finger in there, but just always have it close to it. So so that's sort of how these kind of steadicams work, and that's why they're great, because again, you can use it, you can operate them with one hand. These type of steadicams, again, if you just want to run back and forth, then you don't have to do much. The steadicam works on its own like that. But if you want to change the direction, then some, different people work different ways, and I prefer to sort of grab it here below the gimbal, and depending on what kind of motion I want to do, but I'll either grab it close to the gimbal or a little bit lower sometimes, and just again 2 fingers, apply just a little bit of pressure, and only when you need to. Otherwise, you want the Steadicam to just kind of do its own thing. But when you're running in, for example, like let's say if you're doing some really extreme sort of motion, and quick changes in your movement, then let's say the camera might start shifting to left and right. Like for example, you can see right now it's going a little bit to the right. Then that's when you're watching the camera and you apply just a little bit of pressure onto the shaft here, and stop it from basically going left and right. And then if you want to change the direction of the camera, then again you apply a little bit of pressure and you make the camera go left, and then let go of it. But always have your fingers close here, so that just in case if the camera starts, let's say, going too far to left, then again you can just grab it a little bit and stop it from going left. And the same thing if you want to point down, you point it down and up. Now I know a lot of people still have problems using Steadicams, and the reason is because Steadicams, I don't care what Steadicam you buy, there's no Steadicam out there that I've heard some people saying that oh, it's just because the Steadicam is not good and whatever, and that's why I have problems using it. Like you can see, most of the Steadicams can if they're designed well, they'll perform well on you if you know what you're doing. It's the same thing as with cameras. If you buy a really expensive camera but you don't really know what you're doing, your shots aren't really going to look that good. So I would say, if you buy your Steadicam, or let's say you're at the store, you're trying it out, do a simple test. First, try to balance it, like I told you, weight-wise, and then afterwards just make sure that your camera isn't tilting or rolling to one side too much. And once your Steadicam is, for example, balanced, then you do a very simple test, which is going back and forth, for example, and you see if the camera has a tendency to, again, let's say shakes or create some vibrations, or let's say maybe as you're moving, let's say, and you stop and it like really keeps on drifting to one side, then you know that maybe there's some kind of a design flaw with that Steadicam. But if you're doing this test and the camera will move, like for example this camera moves a little bit to the right, and that's normal, and that actually has nothing to do with the Steadicam. It's more to do with the camera, and the reason is because every camera, there are some cameras out there that are nice and symmetrical, but most cameras are not symmetrical, meaning one side of the camera might have more surface area or more weight, and so simple things like friction, for example, or wind might interfere. And in this case, this side of the camera is heavier, again more inertia on this side, and also it's a bigger surface area, so it's causing this camera to this Steadicam to drift a bit to the right. So that's normal. But again, I'm saying if you do this test and the camera just the Steadicam just drastically moves to one side or keeps on wobbling constantly, then again double check, make sure that you did balance it properly. But if you balanced it and it still keeps on doing that, then you know that the Steadicam itself is not working. But if you did it and like I said, and you can just record that little test of you doing this, and if the shot looks nice and smooth there, then that means the Steadicam is working. Now, to take it to the next level and actually walk around with this and to get the kind of framing that you want to get and be able to quickly change direction, all that stuff, that's just skill. And that's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have to, most people, for example, who are professional Steadicam operators, they'll, back in the day, they used to take, Steadicam seminars. Some of them still do. And, and they're constantly practicing their skills with the Steadicam, because, again, the bigger the Steadicam is, the heavier the camera. For example, might take more strain, more a bit harder to, for example, change the direction, all those things. But also learning how to frame, when to move the camera, how much to move the camera, all those things, and just how much pressure to apply with your fingers. That all takes skill, and to get that skill, you just have to practice. So you'll have to put in some time. Another thing is you also got to keep in mind that, for example, if you're using a zoom lens, which I wouldn't recommend, but if you are, then remember that if you zoom lens in or out, even if the lens might not seem like it's physically changing its size, some of them do it all internally, you got to realize that internally those optics are actually moving, and that's again throwing your balance off. So you might have balanced your camera, but then you'll zoom in or zoom out a little bit and suddenly your camera is a little bit off balance. So you got to keep that in mind. I would recommend when using a Steadicam, use a prime lens, meaning a lens that doesn't zoom, And when it comes to the size of the lens, I find like this one's a 24 millimeter, and that's what I used on the other camera. And the 24 millimeter is sort of an ideal lens because it's wide enough where where it will sort of hide any little mistakes that you make with your Steadicam. Because again, the wider the focal length, then the less you notice shakes and things like that. But it's not so wide that it looks like a fisheye, or that it's obvious that it's a wide lens, and you can still get nice shallow depth of field and those kind of things. But also it's easy enough, like I said, for framing and that kind of stuff. Whereas if you get, for example, a 50 millimeter, let's say, lens, you might be able to do it if you're a good Steadicam operator and you have a lot of experience. But for somebody who's starting out, a 50 millimeter lens means that any tiny little shake in there is going to be twice as noticeable as with a 24 millimeter lens. So that's sort of what you got to keep in mind. And you definitely don't want to be using, unless maybe if you're a really good Steadicam operator, maybe you can put in 100 millimeter or 200 millimeter lens, although I really doubt it. I personally never seen a Steadicam operator using operating a Steadicam and having that kind of a focal length lens on there. And if you go wider, that's no problem. If you want to get these really crazy sort of, let's say, music video shots or nice landscape shots, then again, the wider you go, the easier your job is going to be, because the shakes are not as noticeable. But 24 I would find is like this sort of a nice sweet spot where it doesn't look really like a wide angle lens, but then at the same time it's just wide enough to sort of hide those little imperfections.